Thank you, Matt. Appreciate that. So, I've got some slides too. All right. Oh my God. I was the only one. So, gonna get right to it. Mass timber is a really beautiful system, and I'm really excited about using it in our practice more and more. But it's not without some drawbacks. We have to be honest with each other and talk about those. I personally believe the pros far outweigh the cons, but that's a decision that everybody has to make for their individual project because they're all a little bit different one from the other. One of the things that we are spending a lot of our time working on right now has got a real fancy name. It's called biophilia, or biophilic design. And if you break down the word, it actually is bio and philia. Bio means life, and philia means an affinity for or a love for. So biophilic design is really just about making sure that your designs are the kinds that people really want to be in and love to be in. And it turns out that their affinity for nature itself is absolutely fundamental to that. Either seeing nature or being taken from nature and still retaining the essence of nature, or even mimicking nature in a lot of ways. Those are all components of biophilic design. Now, this is an emerging science, but there is a lot of science now about how much better people, human beings, react to things that are biophilic. And I'll give you a couple of examples. There's a very large study that was done in Scandinavia where they took almost 10,000 people, blindfolded them, otherwise sensory deprived them, other than touch, put them in a room and let them put their hands on different materials that have the exact same texture and the exact same temperature. One of them was wood. Another one was solid plastic. Another one was solid metal. There were others, all right, solid concrete. Almost 95% of the people, even though they were completely sensory deprived, could identify without saying, hey, that's wood. They could say, that's the one I like the best, all right? It's natural. Even just the touch of something wood with no other sensory information is something that people respond to in a positive way. More and more science about this, also in the environmental science. There's a very recent study that I think is very definitive of how people that are in hospitals, if they're in hospital rooms that have all wood cabinetry, and they have a view of something out the window, and that there are at least one or two houseplants in the room, that they need less pain medication and they will recover faster. So this isn't just, we have a feeling about things that are from nature. This is science now, and that's a more and more ever-growing body of science. And you can see, without having to stretch too much, how mass timber might also play into that feeling of biophilia. It's pretty straightforward. These are some examples that are here. That was the only picture that I could find of mass timber in context with woods. I don't know why that was. So I know, if you're out there and that's your photograph, you can sue me for copyright, but I think that's a beautiful photograph. And then this one over here is an example of one of the studies that we did for a hotel that we're working on right now with Cody Tharp and a team to have hotel rooms that are mass timber and where the mass timber is exposed, but also lined so that we can add some color. Whoops. This reforestation thing gets to the answer to your question. What you need to understand is that when you grow a tree, it sucks carbon for 30 years, 50 years, right? When you cut it down and you put it inside the building, it sequesters that carbon, it holds that carbon. That carbon is not released back into the atmosphere. And that same bit of land, thanks to this beam, is regrowing timber at the same time. So now you've got twice the effect, and that's in the first cycle. You do it another cycle, you get 3 times the effect. You do another cycle, you get 4 times the effect. Now, I don't know if you guys watch the news very much, but the idea that we were somehow going to inhibit climate change through conservation, that we were just going to conserve our way out of it by not using as much carbon, has been a failure. It's been a pretty tragic failure. In the month of January, temperature against all expectations actually increased 1/10 of a degree centigrade year over year. That's just 1 month, okay? That pace is a really frightening pace. So the only answer that any of the scientists that I've read about have come up with is reforestation. What we have to do is we have to figure out how to grow forests over and over and over, faster and faster and faster, so that they'll draw carbon from the atmosphere. Because it's too late. We've already put too much in the air. So reforestation is a really important reason it's a pro for using mass timber, because that carbon will be trapped inside that mass timber for an indefinite period of time. By the way, it doesn't stay sequestered very long if you burn it. So growing trees to burn logs in your fireplace is not really the answer.
Would it be okay to say amen?
All right, yes, amen.
Amen.
Thank you, thank you. But when you sit down with your client, whether he's a county commissioner or whether he's a developer, and you say, you're going to feel really good about yourself because you're helping with reforestation, they're going to want more than that. As a matter of fact, they're going to want a lot more than that, because they want to know, okay, what are the economics behind it? The right now economics. What's the return on investment for doing this? And I don't think it's actually a dirty little secret. Mass timber costs more. It costs more than the other framing systems. When we started on the project that we're working on now, I was convinced by some people in Austria that we would be able to do mass timber for about $60 a square foot. I was wrong. At that time, concrete, the post-tension concrete that we were using for other hotels that we were working on, was already approaching $60 a square foot. This is 4 or 5 years ago. At the end of the day, I think it's going to end up costing, I don't know if somebody from West Construction is in the room with me or not, I think it's going to run closer to $90 a square foot. It's expensive, $90 a square foot. I had a county commissioner tell me the other day that he didn't believe that a building that I was proposing was going to cost $400 a square foot. And I just had to stop and say, I mean, we've got almost $100 a square foot tied up and getting it under roof before we do anything else. So sadly, it costs more. I don't know. A long, long time ago, God made a rule that if it's better, it costs more. I don't know why that is, but it just is. Okay? So what do you do to offset that? Well, as you heard earlier, it's lighter in weight than concrete or steel. A lot lighter. So if you've got a really great structural engineer like Mr. Cody Tharp, got a hand up here, please? You will have a foundation that is not over-designed for the heavy weight of steel or concrete. You'll have one that's right-sized and right-designed for the weight of mass timber. And hopefully that'll save some money. But it's hard to compare that to the cost of concrete versus mass timber, because you can just see those on the spreadsheet at the end of the job, right? One's $90 a square foot, one's running about $70 a square foot right now. Ooh, that's a lot. That's kind of a hidden cost. It gets hard to calculate how much did you save on the foundation. But it's there, it's real savings, and you can talk to your client about that. The thing that I like perhaps the most about it is it does not have to be concealed with gypsum board or other ceramics. You don't have to bury it. I grew up in West Virginia. I learned how to design buildings that were, everything came from Pittsburgh. It was all bar joists and steel beams, and you know, that was a very, very efficient way to build back then. But then you had to cover it all up, because frankly, it's kind of ugly, maybe a lot ugly. And so you have suspended ceilings and, you know, all this other stuff, and that costs. And I don't really like looking at an acoustical tile ceiling better than I like looking at beautiful slabs of wood and cross-laminated timber and laminated timber beams. All right, You heard earlier, if it's sized correctly, it's inherently fire resistant. So you just have a structural engineer that helps you with oversize it enough so that when the fire comes, it won't burn all the way into the core and the building will stand still. This is my favorite one right here. I bet it's your favorite one too, okay? It can be grown, it can be harvested, it can be milled, and it can be engineered right here in the United States of America. In Georgia and Alabama, if you do it right, okay? So this is a tremendous advantage for a lot of reasons. We have a political climate now that's going to favor things that are American-made over things that are imported. That's not a bad thing. It's also very good from a sustainability standpoint because we're not spending all that energy that's necessary to import it over long distances. And then the erection time settings. This is very real. The project that we're working on is in a very sensitive location. It is the counterpart to the Owens Thomas House, the single most iconic historic building in Savannah, Georgia. And it's surrounded by wonderful neighbors. And I think if we'd have done it out of post-tension concrete, we probably would have provoked a war. Post-tension concrete is messy, man. It's not just the 120 people that are up there on the scaffolding. It's concrete everywhere. For some reason, they can't ever seem to pour it the way that it's drawn. The plumbing never works, it never fits. You're redoing things constantly. When they miss the hole with the plumbing, and they have to come back, they have to x-ray it and chip it all out with a hammer. I have a book that thick with special inspections where every piece of steel that's still in there. Post-tension concrete is still steel. It just happens to be steel on the inside of concrete. But I got to tell you, as an architect, for the architect, it's easy, man. I just got a building where I said there's 8-inch slabs and there's 12 by 24-inch columns, and I can forget about it, right? Just as long as I don't poke a hole in too often. That's not necessarily true. It probably isn't true with stop. Good. With glue lamp. The details now all of a sudden to the architect as well as the structural engineer, the details really matter. Because you want to see it all, right? You know? And if you're going to see it all, that means you're going to see it all. So you got to be very careful about how every single one of these things fit together and sit down and work with our friends at Smartland who will point out to us because they're looking around corners, you know, that ledge is going to be kind of ugly looking if we don't do it a different way, right? But you got to work through it, you know, it's not for a lazy architect like I used to be. It's for a very diligent architect like I've become. As a consequence. That is part of a BIM model. Now, you know, I grew up hunched over a drafting board drawing with pencils and rapidographs on something called vellum. Some of you probably know what that is, right? Now we use BIM 360 with the ACC, it's all connected, it's all done in real time. If there was ever a construction system that was made for this moment, it's mass timber. Because now you can see it all, and you can study it all, and you can have it all integrated so that all these little beams that look so innocent up here in Cody's model, you can see where they conflict with all the architecture that wanted to get underneath of it and through it and so forth. And you can make sure that it gets programmed in and then it gets cut into the wood. Because if it's not cut into the wood and it's not perfect, then all that erection time stuff is a bunch of hooey. But if it is, we should be able to build, I say we as if it's going to be me, this building should be able to be built, not that large, but still significant for downtown historic district of Savannah. We think the erection time is going to be about 6 weeks. With structural concrete, it probably will be closer to 6 months. in 6 weeks. Wouldn't have been all of 6 months, but it would have been close. Okay? And by then the neighbors would all have probably gotten out their pitchforks and burned it. All right? So details matter, they matter a lot. One of the reasons that you see all the photographs of mass timber buildings and you never see mass timber floors, all right? You see them for the ceilings, you see them for beams, you see it up overhead. You don't usually see it at all for floors, but you usually see in all the photographs is something that looks like concrete. A lot of times it is concrete, but usually that's a topping. It's put on top of a mass timber slab, maybe lightweight concrete, maybe regular strength concrete. But you've got to have that for a number of reasons that actually are not to do with the fire rating. They have to do with acoustics. All right? Now, the building codes that are in effect now have sort of buried down in those little appendices somewhere requirements that most buildings have STC ratings that are 50 or more. And IIRC, which has to do with impact ratings, that are also 50 or more. And that's pretty high compared to the buildings that I designed for 30 or 40 years before this. Mass timber is not particularly good at either of these by itself. You know, if you think about it, there's no air inside of mass timber. And so sound gets transmitted through it pretty fast. You make sound energy hit one side of the mass timber slab, it vibrates that ever so microscopically, and the sound comes right through the wall and vibrates the other side, turns it into a speaker. So when you're designing hotels, when you're designing apartment buildings, and when you're designing office buildings too, you've got to be very careful about how to manage that acoustics, and that's all in the details. You got to learn how to manage those details very, very carefully. So in our residential work, which includes the hotels, you know, we end up with the mass timber slab, and then kind of an air gap that's on resilient channels. That actually sits on an acoustical mat. We're starting with the water. The mat, the acoustical channels that are resilient, then another layer of sheathing, and then at least some lightweight concrete. So it's a sandwich, a big thick sandwich. But then how all that still gets framed and meets the floor, I'm not going to bore you with all the details going over it, but it matters a lot because you want to reduce that sound transmission. And with that flooring system, you also especially want to reduce the impact resistance because otherwise you're going to hear every footfall. Everybody walking around upstairs, you're going to hear it down below, and that's not going to be acceptable. And now it doesn't meet code. So I've got to give you on this, and it was painful to find out that my flooring system didn't meet the IIRC rating. So there's a lot more to be learned about this on acoustics, but it is manageable. It's not like this is some fatal flaw of mass timber. It's just something that as designers and builders especially, that you have to manage around and make sure that you take care of. At the end of the day, you can have a beautiful building. You look at this and you say, I don't know, is it made out of mass timber, or is it made out of steel, or is it made out of concrete? You don't really know. You know it's nice, you know. I'm going to love it better because it's out of mass timber, and I think the people that stay in the hotel are going to love it better because they're going to be in the hotel room where they can see that wood and see how the building is built and enjoy it like that. As a young architect, I had the opportunity to go to renovation work on buildings that were down on the riverfront in Savannah, Georgia. And one of the things that we discovered was the foundations were actually timbers laid over cotton bales. That was how they did it. Amazing, right? They threw cotton bales down there until it soaked up enough of the water that they could put timbers on top of that. And then on top of that, they put masonry. We had masonry and real timbers. So this type of construction, in a way, has been around in Savannah from day one. You know? My other favorite city in the world is Venice, and Italy, and the whole city is built out of wood. Everybody looks at it and says, oh, it's all stone. No, it's all wood. It's just, you know, big timbers that have lasted for hundreds and hundreds of years. So with that, I'll make myself available just a minute or two for questions. I may not be able to stay around until the final end. Again, a shout out to Cody, structural engineer, and also our friends at Smart Land. We're going to have a great project, right guys? Failure is not an option, that's great. Any questions? Please,
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mr. Shay, for the great presentation. I mean, I've known you over the years from far, whether I was at SCAD or being at some of the presentations that you have had. I really enjoyed the research, you know, and the hospital recovery research that you talked about, which is something that I have really, studied as well. I have two questions for you. So have you found that using the mass timber in places like Savannah require a little more work because of the humidity and termite versus using it in other places? The second being, so what do you think the path forward is? Realizing that mass timber is really a revolutionary thing because of all of the benefits that it has. I know that in France, for example, buildings have to actually meet a certain energy requirement standard to be rented or even sold. So they rate it from A to G, G being the worst and you cannot rent. And if it's low, you cannot sell it to a certain price. Do you think that we might need such a thing in America? Or do you think that it should go through education? I'm an educator, where we really need to revolutionize the way we think about things to make this thing so broad, because if not, we are basically flirting with this climate change.
great questions. Termites don't frighten me at all. I've done wood buildings in the southeast for almost 50 years, over 50 years. And you have to take precautions to make sure you don't invite them in. But termites are not any more of a problem for mass timber. In fact, probably less than they are for light wood lumber framing. As far as the European system, I'm learning more and more about how worldwide investors, real estate investment trusts, big banks, when they get ready to refinance, when they get ready to make their decisions about where they're going to place their bets on big building investments, they look to Europe now because of that rating system, and they say they know what they're getting. You know, maybe in the United States they have a chance to look at a tax return because it's part of a financial statement, and that matters to them an awful lot. But they don't have a return like they do in Europe on how they're doing on their sustainability and are they making progress. So although there's a pushback against that movement in the United States politically, the fact that investors can make investments wherever they want to, everywhere in the world, means that more and more of them are going to be betting on projects that can be proven to be sustainable. So we're trying to get finished up a LEED Platinum hotel on the riverfront in Savannah. The fact that it's LEED Platinum rated, I think will make it more attractive for investors in the future. And I think mass timber will also be something that investors will look at. Is it the only decision? No. I mean, if the building's making lots of money, the bankers are going to find a way to loan the money, right? But if it's also happens to be something that's sustainable and more likely to survive for the 20 years of the mortgage, that's also going to be very attractive to them. Is that a good answer? Good.